Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To listen to some in this country, and certainly some of my colleagues, Mexico represents nothing more than a threat to the well-being, the safety of this country, and to every son and daughter in every community within the United States. It is also a threat, some will tell you, to our economy, to our financial well-being in our homes, in our cities, in our states. This vision of Mexico and our relationship with that country and where the two join at the U.S.-Mexico border is dominated by this kind of anxiety, this scaremongering, and an attitude of fear that neglects the truth, the facts, and the opportunities that our relationship with our closest partner on the world stage truly presents. It is my hope tonight to share with my colleagues the facts, the positive truth about what Mexico represents to all of us, certainly in the communities along the U.S.-Mexico border. El Paso, Texas, the city that I have the honor of representing and serving in Congress, the state of Texas, where I'll be joined by colleagues who represent districts deeper into the interior of Texas, but really to everyone, everywhere in the United States. When I listen to some of my colleagues who can be forgiven, much like those in ancient history who, not having traveled to distant lands or across the oceans, could only envision monsters or frightening things that were going to come and get them should they venture past what they knew and what was safe and what was home to them. Those who do not know Mexico, who do not live on the U.S.-Mexico border, may understandably have their thoughts and their concerns dominated by this anxiety and fear. So it is my hope, as someone who lives in and represents part of the U.S. side of the U.S.-Mexico border, to shed some light using facts and using real people, real U.S. citizens, real Mexican citizens, and real people from El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, which together form the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere and one of the largest binational communities anywhere in the world. When you hear people who are concerned about Mexico and what it represents to the United States, that fear is often dominated by two different areas. One is economic, and the other is fear about our security in this country. So let me lay some of those fears to rest. Let me address some of those concerns at face value using the facts and figures from the United States-Mexico relationship and again from the district that I represent in El Paso, Texas. Let me start with some of the economic concerns and address them with the economic facts and the economic argument. Some of my colleagues may not know this, but Mexico is our third largest trading partner. And for some states, like the state of Texas, like the state of New Mexico, like the state of Arizona, like the state of California, Mexico represents our #1 trading partner. And for many other states deeper into the interior, Mexico represents our second largest trading partner. But the volume of trade between our two countries is unlike any other, even among our top trading partner, China. For with Mexico, for every dollar of import value that we bring into this country from Mexico, 40 cents of that dollar were value that originated here in the United States. Components, manufactured goods that were built here in America by Americans, by U.S. citizens, that were exported to Mexico for final assembly and manufacture before reimportation into the United States. It's why with Mexico, when we export to Mexico, we win. When we import from Mexico, we win. And that volume of trade between our two countries is responsible for 1 out of every 4 jobs in the community that I represent, El Paso, Texas. It is responsible for more than 400,000 jobs in the state of Texas, more than 6 million jobs throughout the United States. So I want to make clear that our relationship with Mexico does not just benefit border communities like mine or border states like Texas. You look at New York, 381,000 people depend on our relationship with Mexico for the jobs that they go to each and every morning. In Ohio, the number is 224,000. In the state of Washington, 128,000. In fact, every single one of our 50 states has a significant trading and jobs-based dependent relationship with Mexico. Were we to jeopardize that with harmful rhetoric or wrong-headed policies, we would not just jeopardize this historic relationship with our partner to the south, we would jeopardize the very well-being and lifeblood for 6 million American families spread throughout this country. In fact, if we don't do a better job of facilitating the trade we have with Mexico right now, we run the risk of losing the jobs we already have. The Department of Commerce estimates that for every minute of delay on our international ports of entry that connect the United States and Mexico, because we're not getting more trade into the United States from Mexico and out of the United States into Mexico, we lose about $166 million. For every minute of delay, $166 million lost to the United States economy. Now, let me talk about the security argument. And I just heard from my colleague from Iowa that Mexico and Mexican immigrants, whether they are undocumented, whether they are pursuing a better life in this country, whether they are, as almost all of them are, net contributors to our economy, to our community, to the safety of our cities, that somehow they represent this terrible threat, the primary threat for our country, and the sky and everything with it is falling should we not be able to deport these 11 million undocumented immigrants from communities like Washington, D.C., from El Paso, Texas, from Fort Worth, from throughout the United States. I'd like to share something with my colleagues and with you, Mr. Speaker, about the effect that immigrants have on the safety of our communities. As I mentioned, I represent El Paso, Texas, which with Ciudad Juarez forms one half of the largest binational community anywhere in the world. 24% of the people that I represent were born in another country, most of them the country of Mexico. And I will tell you that it is not in spite of that fact that we have so many migrants in our community, but in large part because of it, that El Paso is this country's safest city, over 500,000. So of all the large cities in this country, from Los Angeles on the west coast to New York on the east, El Paso is this country's safest city. And it has been not just in the past year, but for years before this last one. And for the last 10 or 15 years, it's been rated one of the top 5 safest cities in the United States. And that is because the relationship that we have with Mexico, the migrants who come from that country are coming to this one to build a better life for themselves, certainly, but more importantly, and connected to our relative safety, they're building a better life for their kids. They're keeping them focused on their studies, on contributing to their communities, on staying out of trouble, on getting ahead and doing better. That's what I want you to know when we talk about security connected to immigration and when we talk about security relative to Mexico. I also want my colleagues who themselves are taxpayers and the taxpayers they represent to know that today we spend $18 billion a year to secure the U.S.-Mexico border. That in the last 10 years, we have doubled the size of the Border Patrol force from 10,000 agents to 20,000 agents. And that we are reaching, if we are not already past, a point of diminishing returns where we can do no more good by spending more dollars, by adding more agents to already swollen ranks of Border Patrol. Let me give you some facts that bear that out. In the year 2000, we had 1.6 million apprehensions at our border with Mexico. This last year, in 2015, we had 330,000 apprehensions. Another way to look at this is that in 2005, the average Border Patrol agent on the southern border, our border with Mexico, made 106 apprehensions a year in that year, 2005. 10 years later, 2015, last year, the average agent made 17 apprehensions the entire year, And in the El Paso sector, again, one of the most critical sectors for our connection with Mexico, the average agent made 6 apprehensions all year. Not in a week, not in a month, but 6 apprehensions for the entire year. So El Paso is the safest city. Other border cities on our side of the U.S.-Mexico border are much safer than the interior of the United States. We're spending record sums. We're seeing record low levels of apprehensions. We're literally seeing less than zero migration from Mexico now, and we have been for a number of years. It begs the question when I hear my colleagues talk about securing the border before we proceed with immigration reform or any other sensible, realistic, logical policy when it comes to immigration or our relationship with Mexico. It begs the question when they ask that we secure the border, how much more secure can we get? How many more billions of dollars do you want to spend? How many more miles of walls do you want to construct? How many more thousands of agents do you want to hire? How many fewer apprehensions could we have? How far below zero can our immigration from Mexico reach? The last point on the security issue that I want to stress for my colleagues is this one. Despite the rhetoric, despite the anxiety, despite the fear that is often provoked on cable TV or even in this chamber, there has never been, nor is there now, any credible terrorist organization, terrorist threat, or terrorist who is using the southern border, our border with Mexico, to infiltrate the United States. And I have that on public record from the director of the FBI, the director for the National Counterterrorism Center, and the Secretary for Homeland Security. The danger of continuing to surge more resources where we don't have a problem is that we take our eye and our money and our men and women off those places where we know we've had threats in the past, our international airports. In fact, even our northern border with Canada, where attempts have been made in the past, and certainly with homegrown, home-radicalized terrorists or potential terrorists in our communities. That's where we know we have a threat. That's where we need to pursue that threat. It doesn't mean that we do not remain vigilant against the potential for a terrorist threat coming along our border with Mexico. But I would argue with 20,000 agents, $18 billion being spent a year, drones flying overhead, 600 miles of wall, we are very vigilant against the potential of any terrorist incursion from Mexico. And before I yield to my good friend from Dallas-Fort Worth, I want to talk a little bit about the people who actually live in this binational community that I've been talking about, El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, where between the two communities last year, there were 32 million crossings, 32 million times someone crossed from El Paso into Ciudad Juarez or Juarez into El Paso. I thought I would share with you, through these pictures to my right, some of the remarkable people that I live with in the El Paso Juarez community, some of the amazing people that I represent. The first person that we're looking at is Armando. And I started with Armando at the end of his day as he closed up the plant that he manages in Ciudad Juarez. Even though he lives in the United States and his children who are U.S. citizens and attend U.S. public schools in El Paso, Texas, he crosses over the border into Mexico every morning, works a hard day managing a plant there, and then comes back over into the United States where he pays his U.S. property taxes, his U.S. income taxes, where he contributes by going and helping to coach his son's soccer game, which is where we took this picture with Armando and his wife. He's one of these 32 million people that's crossing the border. He is somebody who has come from Mexico that's contributing to this country, whose children are growing up here, someone that I'm very proud to have in my community. This next slide shows a picture of Israel. And Israel lives in Ciudad Juarez, but attends school at the University of Texas in El Paso. And in its infinite wisdom, the state of Texas granted in-state tuition coverage for citizens of Mexico to attend schools in our communities in the state of Texas, because we know that Texas will be the net beneficiary of their talent and their human capital. So Israel gets up very early every morning, sometimes before 5 o'clock, so that he can make it over the International Bridge in time to get to the University of Texas at El Paso, where he's an all-star student and also works at the Keck Lab, which is one of the premier additive manufacturing facilities at any academic institution in the United States. These are 3D printing jobs that are the future of manufacturing technology. And if we do right by Israel, Israel is going to want to spend his life and his career and add value and add tax base and add tax income and create jobs in our country, in the community that I represent. That's why I crossed the bridge with Israel, to learn a little bit about him and his experience. This slide shows a picture of Vicky, who I joined in downtown Ciudad Juarez. She's walking up Avenida Juarez, another block or two, and we will pass the Kentucky Club, which I want everyone to know we did not go into. It was before 5 o'clock. But Vicky, who is a Mexican national, is carrying her shopping bags because at least once a month she comes over to the United States, to my community, to spend her hard-earned money in our local retail establishments, in our stores, to do the shopping for her and her family. In fact, Mexican nationals like Vicky spend about $1.4 billion in the El Paso economy annually. That supports tens of thousands of retail jobs, of small business owners who I represent here in the House. This is the face of the border, the face of Mexico, the face of our connection. This was Vicky, with whom I crossed the border a couple of weeks ago. This next slide shows Manuel, who is driving a load of Werner ladders. Werner is the largest ladder manufacturer in the world. They manufacture about 70% of those ladders in Ciudad Juarez. The inputs for those ladders come from all over the United States. They're connected to jobs in this country that go over to Mexico, then are connected to jobs there, then are re-imported here for export for benefit of the United States and Mexico. Here he is crossing his load, his part of the $90 billion in U.S.-Mexico trade that crosses our ports of entry, that's connected to those 6 million jobs spread throughout the United States. If we could get those bridges moving a little faster, get more CBP officers who can facilitate more of that trade, we can get more loads of ladders moving across, more jobs connected in the United States to trade and manufacturing in Mexico. Good for my community, good for each of the communities represented by the members here in the chamber tonight. And the last slide I'll show you is Lisa, and you can see that I jumped into the back seat of her car as she left the plant that she works in Ciudad Juarez. She moved down to El Paso from Michigan about 20 years ago. She's been working in Ciudad Juarez every day with other U.S. and Mexican citizens, creating value in both countries, jobs in both countries, economic growth in both countries. And so here we are in her car, about to cross back into El Paso, Texas, where again, she pays her taxes, where she contributes to her community, where she is the face of the U.S.-Mexico relationship, and why it is so important not just to preserve it, not just to respect it, but to grow it and to capitalize on it and to create more jobs, more opportunities, more growth in both of our countries. And I thought these 5 paseños and Juarezes who I have the pleasure of living with in El Paso, the honor of representing here in the House, might tell you a little bit of a different story than the one that has prevailed and dominated from people who do not live on and frankly do not understand the border or our relationship with Mexico. But someone who does, and who is here with me tonight, who represents a congressional district in Fort Worth and Dallas, who understands the importance of our relationship with Mexico better than almost any other person that I have worked with, is Mark Vesey. And Mr. Vesey, I now yield the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Representative O'Rourke. Really appreciate your work on this issue. You've been doing a great job of really kind of setting the facts straight about this issue. There's been a lot of rhetoric out there about what immigration means, and I think that the fact that you have worked so hard to bring recognition about the economic benefits that the border has, particularly to our state of Texas, and you've been very tremendous in your efforts, and really, really do appreciate that. And wanted to just talk about the fact how important the relationship is, the economic impact that you talk about all the time, how important it is to Texas and the United States. According to the United States Trade Representative, U.S. goods and services traded with Mexico totaled an estimated $500+ billion in 2015. Mexico was the United States' second largest goods export market in 2015. In 2013, Texas, our home state of Texas, exported over $109 billion in goods with Mexico, and that was a 63% increase since 2008. It's really hard to argue with those numbers. It just shows how healthy the relationship is with Mexico, and about really how incredibly foolish it would be to try to create barriers between our two countries that could cause economic harm to both Mexico and the United States and our border state of Texas. The United States relationship with Mexico, again, when you look at the economic picture, agriculture. That's something that people oftentimes take for granted, you know, how they get their milk, how they get their fruit, how they get their vegetables. The agriculture is how we eat in this country. And I've met with different organizations that represent agriculture. Just had some cattle raisers from the Fort Worth area here. And they talked about the fact that we don't have a comprehensive immigration reform bill, and how we need to improve our guest worker program, and is how it's really hurting their industry. And these are conservative Republicans that are telling me this, Representative O'Rourke. These aren't, liberal Democrats or advocacy groups. These are people that are concerned about economic growth and prosperity in the United States and in border states, that are saying that, hey, we have a huge problem here in agriculture. One of our conservative institutes in the state of Texas, Texas A&M University, down in College Station, they did a study back in 2012 that looked at dairy farms and found out that the dairy farms are very heavily dependent upon migrant labor. 3/5 of the milk in this country is dependent upon migrant labor. I think that speaks in and of itself. Without these employees, the study predicts economic output would decline by $22 billion, and 133,000 workers would lose their jobs. And, you know, what are we going to do if that happens? Like, what are we really going to do? What are the Republicans going to do if that happens? If they were able to create borders and barriers between our southwest border, they're certainly not going to want to make up with it in any sort of social services to help people, because they're always hollering about how they don't want to expand government. So what are they going to do if we lose all of that money? They're going to do absolutely nothing, and it would be very detrimental. And then also immigrant entrepreneurship. In addition to providing a reliable workforce, immigrants are also a boost to local economies when they open up businesses in their communities. More than 40% of the Fortune 500 companies here were founded by immigrants or by their children, according to the Partnership for a New American Economy. I want to highlight one of my friends that has a business in my district, Gloria Fuentes. She was actually my guest, Representative O'Rourke, at the State of the Union earlier this year. She was someone back in the 1970s that was fleeing her home country of El Salvador, and she immigrated to the United States, and her visa expired, and later she became a permanent resident in 1986. And because of her hard work, working extra jobs, going to nightclubs at night to sell tamales and tacos, now she has a restaurant chain of 15 all across the state of Texas. And that was done by someone that came here as an immigrant. Why wouldn't we want to make it easier for people like Gloria to migrate to this country? Why wouldn't we want to make it easier for us to be able to exchange and trade ideas with people from countries that are south of our border? We're really moving too slowly on the immigration issue, and again, and the rhetoric about the southwest border is really hurting our country, particularly when you look at the net migration and how many people have decided that, you know what, that they don't want to live in the United States anymore just because of all of the rhetoric, the hateful rhetoric that's out there, mainly coming from the Republican side. And I think that it's time that it stopped, because I think that our country, I know that our country is better than that. And I just want to thank you for getting this conversation started. I want to thank you for your expertise and depth on this issue, particularly with you coming from El Paso. It is certainly great to have you talking about this so much and reminding people about the facts, because there are a lot of things out there that are floating around the Congress, again, coming from the Republican side, that are completely untrue and deliberately false and meant to spread fear across our country. But the fact that you're here and you're educating the country on this very important issue means a lot to our state and to the United States. So thank you very much, Representative O'Rourke, and thank you for letting me share this time with you. I yield back.
I thank my friend from Texas, and I thank him amidst all this heat in the rhetoric around Mexico, our relationship with that country, the cost or benefit of immigration, that he's able to shed some light using the facts, sharing the truth, so that we understand our shared interdependence, shared benefit, and the value of the relationship between the United States and Mexico. Mr. Speaker, may I ask how much time remains?
The gentleman has about 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I invite my colleagues who have used the excuse, because they believe it, that we must first secure the border before we can do anything else, before we can improve our relationship with Mexico, before we can capitalize on the shared production platform that is the United States and Mexico today, where 40% of the value of everything that we import from Mexico originated in this country, is connected to jobs in this country. I invite my friends who use securing the border as an excuse not to move forward on immigration reform, despite the fact that we have 11 million people here who are living in the shadows, who despite that do their best to contribute to this country each and every day, in service to this country, in creating jobs in this country, in serving those in this country. I invite you to see the truth, to look at the facts, and to understand that our relationship with Mexico has never been more important. Our border with Mexico has never been more secure by any metric we want to look at, whether it's apprehensions, whether it's total spent on the security of that border, whether it's the number of men and women, 20,000 who are patrolling that border with our closest partner, certainly the closest trading partner in the state of Texas. I would argue the most important country for the United States, whether you look at it economically, demographically, historically, or culturally. I hope these facts, this truth, this light that we are working to shed on the issue will help my colleagues to make better decisions, better policies, and move forward in the self-interest of this country and every district and every person that we represent, to do the right thing when it comes to Mexico, to do the right thing when it comes to immigration reform, and to do the right thing in the interests of the United States. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.